Everybody, peace. Welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast Show, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As you guys know, I'm your host, Casuan, and we have got another day, another show jam-packed with content for college football. We've got so much stuff to talk with you about today, guys. We're gonna be talking about the biggest takeaways from the from the Miami versus Texas A&M matchup from this past weekend. And what that means for the SEC. Is the SEC in trouble? Is there trouble looming down in the SEC? The quote-unquote bad boys of college football? We're going to be discussing all of that. We're going to actually close out this show by giving our previews for two key matchups in college football. One of them being Kansas State and Missouri. The other being Ohio State and Western Kentucky. And we're also going to be discussing who had the best individual performance from this past weekend. We're going to be covering all of that in the show today, guys. But before we get started, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the like button as well to stay up to date on all of our latest content. And be sure to subscribe to us on Patreon as well so you can get access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. And if you'd like to support our company and our network, follow the link in the ticker below. None of this is possible without you guys. We're just so grateful for all support that you guys show us and that you trust us with all of your sporting needs. If you have already, be sure to check out the GSMC Baseball Podcast, Basketball Podcast, Fantasy Football Podcast, and NFL Podcast. All of our hosts are some of the best in the business, and they provide some of the greatest content in sports media that you can't get anywhere else. With that being said, guys, let's just dive right into it, man, because I know the SEC has been getting a lot of flack this past weekend with losses by Alabama, by Texas A&M, losses to LSU in week 1. The SEC has been getting a lot of flack, right? So let's just recap this Texas A&M and Miami game. So, for those of you who don't know already, number 23 ranked at the time, Texas A&M lost to Miami by a score of 48 to 33 down in Miami, Florida. Miami jumped out to early lead going into halftime and just only padding the lead in the fourth quarter. This game wasn't particularly quite close, man. Let's look at the stat line for a little bit. For Miami, Tyler Van Dyke threw for 21 for 30 with 374 yards and 5 touchdowns. Henry Parrish Jr. had 10 carries for 50 yards. A.J. Allen had 5 carries for 22 yards. Donald Chaney Jr. had 3 carries for 11 yards. And Mark Fletcher Jr. had 4 carries for 6 yards. And Xavier Restrepo had 6 receptions for 126 yards. Jacoby George had 5 receptions for 94 yards and 3 touchdowns. Colby Young had 6 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown. And Isaiah Horton had 1 reception for 52 yards and a touchdown. So this was it was a highly offensive game. Obviously by looking at the box score. But one thing that I was impressed with was Miami's ability to not only control tempo but attack the secondary of Texas A&M. This is a Texas A&M team led by Jimbo Fisher, who throughout his years of coaching, even going back to Florida State, has always been known for recruiting a stout secondary. And this is a secondary that has a little bit of experience back there, but still struggled. And the reason and we talk about this quite a bit, the reason that the secondary struggled so much for Texas A&M is because the front seven once again was not able to generate much pressure. So if we look at the Texas A&M defense, they had 2 sacks, and they had 2 sacks, but they still weren't able to generate consistent pressure. Because when you say pressure, that doesn't always have to lead to sacks. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting the quarterback out of the pocket or forcing the quarterback to rush the read and to get the ball out early. And watching that game, Tyler Van Dyke never looked uncomfortable in the pocket. He never looked like he was in a rush. And one, that's a testament to his skill set and his ability to be poised in the pocket. But also, it's a testament to his offensive line and the ability to bottle up that pressure. And Texas A&M struggled, obviously, in the front seven, generating pressure, which allowed Van Dyke more time to make those reads in the secondary. And there were so many times that Texas A&M got beat on the deep ball. And watching the game, I'm trying to figure out why you don't shift your coverage to more zone coverage as opposed to man, to somewhat prevent the deep ball. So I don't know why you just don't go cover 3 on that. But watching the game, those are some things that came to my mind. And if we look at Texas A&M, Connor Wegman went 31 for 53 with 336 yards and 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. 2 key interceptions at that, I might add. And Amari Daniels had 18 carries for 62 yards and a touchdown. And Connor Wegman, their second leading rusher, had 5 carries for 29 yards and a touchdown. And Noah Thomas had 4 receptions for 38 yards and a touchdown. Evan Stewart had 11 receptions for 142 yards. And Ernest Crownover had 1 reception for 19 yards on the touchdown. Texas A&M also had another lost fumble, so that's 3 turnovers, and opposed to Miami's turnover count where they only had 1. And turnovers will always be the rule of the game for football. It'll always be a huge component because with the rule change that we talked about yesterday, where there is no longer, or the clock no longer stops after each first down. And within the last 6 minutes of each half, each possession is that much more crucial for a team, and that just amplifies the gravitas when there is a turnover. So teams are going to have to be much more cautious of their ball control this season with the new rule change, and this is a Texas A&M team that did a great job of taking care of the ball last season, but as we see, they have not done a good job of taking care of the ball so far this year. And that could be for a multitude of reasons. It could be for a matter of could it be experience? Could it be that there's a lack of experience in the on the Texas A&M offense? I mean, Connor Wegman, he is a sophomore, so he has a little bit of experience. But could it be just the Texas A&M's inability to make the right reads? And there are a multitude of factors, but at the end of the day, we have to reassess Texas A&M and think about: are they actually one of the best teams in the SEC? Do they actually deserve to be ranked in the top 25? And is Miami better than we expected them to be? We saw the offensive prowess that they put up, and we saw how they performed last week as well. This is a Miami team that has a lot of explosiveness and a lot of talent on the offensive end. Though their defense does leave quite a bit to be desired. I know they were able to generate 2 interceptions right there, but on those throws, Connor Wegman was forcing the issue, was forcing into tight windows, into tight spaces. And when you play against a Florida State led by Jordan Hunter, or Jaden Daniels, Travis Hunter, you're not gonna have those mistakes, those miscues. So Miami's gonna have to be much more crisp on on in the secondary. And I think this was a matter of just of good Miami. Yeah, it was bad Texas A&M, but it was a matter of good good Miami as well. And it is just a testament to how good Miami is. And I think the SEC is gonna provide a lot more context and show the country that this conference is much better than people expected, because after everyone saw how Clemson performed against Duke in the opening game, people had a little cause for concern with the ACC. But seeing Florida State's performance and seeing Miami's performance, it should give a little more credence and give a little bit more comfort, knowing that there is some talent and there's going to be great football to be played in the ACC this year. But which leads us to talk about the SEC. Is there cause for concern in the SEC? Is this conference not as good as people thought it was? And how will they bounce back moving forward? The issue with SEC teams is that they play such a tough conference schedule. I never understood the concept of scheduling tough out of conference opponents, especially if you're a Georgia or an Alabama or an LSU, where you're constantly in Tennessee, where you're constantly in contention for the SEC championship game every season, year in, year out. The SEC is one of those conferences where your conference schedule is good enough to get you into the playoff if you go undefeated. Why run the risk of adding a loss to your schedule when you don't need to? And we know the SEC is, with Alabama's dominance for the past couple of years and the resurgence of Georgia, that these SEC teams are starting to cause fatigue for the College Football Playoff Committee. They no longer want to see these SEC teams in there, and it showed with how they voted. How the College Football Playoff Committee didn't vote for Alabama to get into the College Football Playoff last season. Even though it was clear that Alabama, even though they had 2 losses, was one of the best teams in the conference, in the country. And when it comes to SEC and scheduling their out of conference games, I know finances play a factor in it, but why schedule these tough out of conference opponents? Some people will say it's to get ready for the SEC conference schedule, but if you're not ready by week 3, it doesn't matter who you've played in those out of conference games. You're not going to be ready for the conference. Those doesn't matter. And I just don't understand why you run the risk of adding a loss to your record when if you go undefeated in the SEC and you win the SEC championship game, you're going to, without a doubt, get into the SEC, get into the college football playoff. And even if you go undefeated in SEC conference play and lose the SEC championship game, you have a much better chance of winning or still getting into the college football playoff with the SEC championship game lost than having a loss in the beginning of the season. And that's my perspective, how I see things on that when it comes to the SEC and why they schedule tough out of conference opponents. But guys, those are our biggest takeaways from the Miami and Texas A&M matchup from this past weekend. Coming up though, who had the best performance, the best individual performance from this past weekend? Guys, we're going to cover all of that and then some. So stick around. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. In case you missed our first segment, we covered the matchup from this past weekend with Texas A&M and Miami. What our biggest takeaways were from that, and what the implications from that matchup mean for the SEC, the ACC, and college football as a whole, and what it represents. Later on in the show, we're going to be giving our previews for two big matchups coming up this week between Kansas State and Missouri and Ohio State and Western Kentucky. But with this segment right here, guys, I wanted to talk about some of the best performances that we saw from this past weekend, and just wanted to shed some light on that. The biggest performances from this past weekend, best individual performances, I might add. But before we get started, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button as well, so you guys can stay up to date on all of our latest content. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to us on Patreon as well, so you can get access to all of our exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And if you would like to support and donate to our company and our network, follow the link in the ticker below. Listen, guys, none of this is possible without you guys, so we're just so grateful for you guys just tuning in and listening to our show. It's a blessing, so thank you so much. But with that being said, guys, I want to talk about the best individual performances from this past weekend in college football. All right, so people are going to ask me, all right, Casuan, what's the criteria? How are you judging these individual performances? Because I think my quarterback, I think my defensive end, I think my offensive lineman, I think my tackle had the best performance. So here are the criteria. Impact during the game. Were you impactful? Did you jump off the screen? Did you have a resounding impact on not just the game, but the world of college football that day? Did your performance create headlines? 2, clutch factor. Did you show up when it mattered most in your game? Did you lead a game-winning drive within the last minute of the game to lead your team to a victory, to an upset victory, if that fits the case on the road? Who knows? That plays a factor. Clutch factor. 3, dominance. Were you dominant in your performance? Were you unequivocally the best player on that field just by watching film? And second, narrative. Was it a big win? Was it a top 15 win? Was it a win on a nationally televised game? Those are all things that play a factor in me choosing the best individual performances from this week. So no, this is not biased. It's completely unbiased. Do not worry, guys. Completely unbiased, objective. You're just looking at the best performances of this week. So with that being said, guys, let's break it down. Okay, best performances from this past weekend, and this is in no particular order. I might add. I just want to break it down. So let's start with Bo Nix. So as you guys know, we talked about this yesterday. Bo Nix led Oregon to a 38-30 victory over Texas Tech, preventing the upset in clutch fashion. Bo Nix went 32 for 44, throwing for 359 yards and 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. All this done in Texas, I might add, on the road. Very dominant performance with his throwing because the run game was inefficient and could not get in a rhythm. Though Texas Tech should have won this game, they didn't. Bo Nix did a great job of leading a couple key drives towards the end of the game to help mount the comeback. And because of his ability to make late game drives and score points when it mattered most, that is why I have Bo Nix as one of the top performances of the week. Okay, moving on to our second big game performer of the week, guys. We have with Shadir Sanders of Colorado. Um, you know, just going off the numbers, Shadir Sanders went 31 for 42 with 393 yards and 2 touchdowns. And, he looked poised in the pocket. Watching the game, it's no question that Shadir is one of the best players, not just at the quarterback position, but in all of college football. Led Colorado to an early 2-possession lead in this going into the second half, and just continued to build upon that lead. As we see the score, they won 36-14. The big thing right here, though, no interceptions. Definitely had a great job. Definitely not anyone's from Auburn's offense. Yeah, definitely. I agree. But Colorado did a great job of controlling tempo and really imposing their will against Nebraska and with the play style. And we saw that Shadir Sanders led that rally, and we have Shadir Sanders as another one of our individual performances of the week. So this one is going to hurt a little bit, but I have to give credit where credit is due. And that is and that's with gosh, it's going to hurt me to say this, but with Quinn Ewers from Texas. Quinn Ewers went 24 for 38 with 349 yards and 3 touchdowns in Texas' dominating performance against Alabama. As you guys know, Texas won 34-24 in Tuscaloosa. Quinn Ewers led Texas to that victory, something that hasn't been done since 2019 in Joe Burrow, LSU Tigers. And if it's any indicator at all, not putting the cart before the horse, not getting too far ahead of ourselves, but Joe Burrow did win the Heisman that year. The last quarterback to win in Tuscaloosa, Joe Burrow, 2019, won the Heisman. And then I think back to another quarterback that beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Johnny Manziel, also won the Heisman. Cam Newton also won the Heisman. So, just some things to think about, as we move forward. But, this Quinn Ewers, as we said, 24-38, 349 yards, 3 touchdowns, looked poised throughout its entirety. Was dominating fashion. No turnovers. Once again, is a big indicator. It's always key right here, especially with the quarterback position. And like we talked about in our first segment, the ability to, because of the new rule change and because of the clock no longer stopping after each first down within the last 6 minutes of each half, each possession is that much more important, and it's that much more important for the quarterback to control the possession, to control the ball, and not put the ball in bad situations. Quinn Ewers, as an Alabama fan, I have to give credit where credit is due, and this was by far one of the best performances, not just today or this season, but against Alabama's history. It's up there with the Johnny Manziels and, like I said, the Joe Burrows and the Cam Newtons performance. Even is up there with Jaden Daniels' performance last year that LSU had against Alabama. And yes, absolutely, the throw that Ewers made to Worthy in the second is one of the best deep throws ever by a college football quarterback. And quick aside, I know Jalen Milroe from Alabama is getting a lot of flack, and he's getting a lot of criticism for his performance. But I do want to say this: Jalen Milroe has one of the best deep balls in college football. I know he's not always accurate with the intermediate and the short throws, but his ability to throw the deep ball is not for real. It's extremely impressive. But yes, that throw by Quinn Ewers in the second quarter to Worthy was one of the best throws that I've seen ever. Yes, he was doomed by the Alabama secondary. Yes, I do agree with that. But speaking of deep throws, real quick, I think the best throw I've ever seen in college football in my lifetime, quick aside, was Bryce Young against Kansas State last season during the bowl game when he threw that ball in the receiver's name that he threw it to has slipped my mind, but he put it was from the 40-yard line. He put that ball right on the money in the short corner of the end zone, and he put it in a spot where no one else could get it in. I saw that throw, and that was the second time in my lifetime I said that is no one else in the world can make that throw. The only other time I said that before was when Aaron Rodgers was playing the Dallas Cowboys in the 2016 divisional round, and it was the last throw of the game. Aaron Rodgers, scrambling toward the sideline, makes the throw to the tight end, and it led to the Mason Crosby game-winning field goal. But that throw that Aaron Rodgers made in that divisional round against Dallas Cowboys, that was probably the best throw I've ever seen in my life, collegiate or NFL at any level. But guys, those are our top performances of the week. Guys, in our next segment, we're going to preview yes, Alzheimer. We're going to discuss the breakdown between Kentucky and Ohio State, and so we're going to also cover some breaking news that Ohio State just let out a little bit earlier today. So guys, stick around. You are not going to miss it. All right, everybody, welcome back. In case you missed our previous segments today, we talked about um, the best performances that we saw from this past weekend, and I talked about why I had Quinn Ewers and Shadur Sanders and Bo Nix on that list, and we also talked about the biggest takeaways from the matchup between Texas A&M and Miami, and what that means and what that represents for not just the SEC, but also for college football as a whole. And I really broke down why I just don't understand the concept of why SEC teams want to schedule tough opponents for their out of conference schedule, because quite frankly, in my mind, I do think that if you can run the table in the SEC and for some reason lose in the SEC championship game, you have a much better chance of making the college football playoff than if you have a loss in the beginning of the season. And voter fatigue from the committee plays a factor in that. And I think and I know finances and a lot of these teams have deals with other schools for these out of conference games, but these are things that the SEC has to be aware of, moving forward, because the committee doesn't want to see SEC teams in the college football playoff anymore, because it's just a matter of voter fatigue. And as we're moving forward, or the SEC is moving forward in the future, even with the expansion, that is something that they have to be aware of. But yes, 2017 Auburn makes the playoffs if they don't schedule Clemson. Agree, yes, absolutely. And that season is actually a prime example of that. I mean, so a lot of people were upset at the end of that season because Alabama lost to Auburn, and that's the same Auburn team that lost to Georgia in the SEC championship game. And a lot of people were saying, well, how can Alabama make the playoffs if the team they lost to Georgia in the SEC championship game, and how does Auburn not make the playoffs? So that was a year where you very well could have made the argument that you could have had three teams in the college football playoff, with being Georgia, Auburn, and Alabama. But those are instances where people forget that the purpose of the college football playoff is to get the four best teams. Not who necessarily won their conference, not who went undefeated. The purpose of the college football playoff is to get the four best teams. And if it just so happens that the four best teams, or three of the four best teams, come from the same conference, then it is what it is. That's just how the cookie crumbles. But I digress. So, guys, I wanted to use this. We're gonna preview Ohio State and Western Kentucky, and I know if you guys are currently looking at the matchup predictor on ESPN, I know it says that Ohio State has a 97% chance to win, and you're probably thinking to yourself, all right, Casuan, why are we really discussing this? Why are we talking about this matchup right here? I think this has a lot of implications because, for those of you who don't know, earlier today, Ohio State named their starting quarterback, and they decided to go with McCord as the official starting quarterback, and Hilltoppers by 30. Whoever is in Vegas right now picking Western Kentucky, and if they end up winning, you are going to make a lot of money. But listen, I'm not a betting man person myself, but I would not bet against Ohio State in this game. But yeah, guys, so McCord was just named the starting quarterback this week, officially for the rest of the season, and there was a little bit of quote unquote quarterback controversy coming into the season, and I remember watching, and I was thinking to myself, is this really a controversy? And I think that this game from this past weekend against Youngstown State really sealed the deal, because if we look at if we look at Kyle McCord's performances over the past 2 games, let's just look at his performance against Indiana. He didn't perform too well. He went 20 for 33, 239 yards, and 1 interception. But also the Ohio State rushing attack performed really well with Chip Trayanum at going for 57 yards and Mayan Williams going for 2 touchdowns on 7 carries. So that was an instance where Ohio State necessarily didn't need to throw the ball particularly well. They did a good job establishing run that game. But if we look at the performance against Youngstown State and we look at the stat line there, this most recent game, we'll see that the Kyle McCord had a little better performance, went 14 of 20, 258 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Devin Brown went 7 for 13 and 101 yards. And I know people will say, well, yeah, it's Youngstown State, so what do you expect? But I think that watching that game and watching the highlights and seeing the game, using our eye test, quote unquote, the offense looked a little more fluid in my perspective while watching McCord play. While McCord was out there, he looked like he had more control of the offense. He looked like he had great commanding presence, and he looked more comfortable. Granted, it could be because he's a junior as opposed to Devin Brown, who's a sophomore. But I think Kyle McCord showed the ability to throw the deep ball, but also the intermediate ball, and he did a great job of making audibles and checkdowns. And that's what was really impressive to me from Kyle McCord, and I think that's why Ohio State went with him as the starting quarterback. And when you're thinking about, okay, who should Ohio State choose as the starting quarterback, here's how you need to analyze it, and here's the sort of thought process you need to have. Who would I rather have as my starting quarterback against Michigan if I'm down but not playing Michigan and I need a touchdown on the final drive to win the game? Who would I rather have at my quarterback in this moment right here? Would I rather have Kyle McCord or would I rather have Devin Brown? And that's the thought process that we need to have when choosing, okay, who do we want as our starting quarterback? Who do we want as our starting safety? Who do we want as, if we go to basketball, as our starting point guard? When we think about the most clutch situations or the most pressurized moments in the game, who do we want on the court or who do we want on the field at that time? And normally when you think about it in that perspective, normally your answer is right. It goes right to your head. You think about it right away. And without even second guessing yourself, without over analyzing it, the answer comes to your mind. And that's the thought process we need to have when analyzing these type of situations about who should be the starting quarterback. And I believe Ohio State made the right decision by going with Kyle McCord. And the reason this game is so pivotal for Ohio State is because it's going to show that Ohio State made the right decision by going with Kyle McCord at the starting quarterback, and it's going to be a good dress rehearsal game for Kyle McCord before he gets into Big Ten play, and that's why I wanted to cover this game. Sorry, Western Kentucky fans, I didn't really talk about you guys, kind of just used you as a framing device, but I hope you guys understand that this is a big game for Ohio State because, like I said, it's going to be used as a dress rehearsal for Kyle McCord, and don't be surprised if with this performance he puts the Big Ten on notice for how good he can really be. But guys, another interesting matchup, another interesting game being played this weekend is also Kansas State and Missouri. Another Big 12 SEC matchup. So guys, we're going to cover all of that in our last segment, so stick around. You are not going to miss any of it. And also, if you haven't already, guys, be sure, once again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button as well. Stay up to date on all of our latest content. So guys, stick around for our final segment of the show. You are not going to miss it. All right, everybody, welcome back to the final segment of our show, guys. If you are just tuning in, we discussed earlier in the show the implications from the Texas A&M Miami game, what implications that will have on the SEC and college football as a whole. By the way, I know that Texas A&M had a pretty decent season last season. But I just want to think about something real quick. Is Jimbo Fisher now on the hot seat? I know, listen, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but it's just something to think about, guys. Is, with this loss that the Texas A&M had against Miami, is Jimbo Fisher on the hot seat? Maybe too early to say. Let me know what you guys think about that. In our second segment, we talked about who had the best performance of the week, and even though it broke my heart to say it, Shedeur Sanders and Quinn Ewers and Bo Nix all had dominated performances, but if I had to go with my choice, yes, it does. It would cost way too much to fire him. Especially with the contract that he's under right now. If I'm not mistaken, let me know if I'm wrong about this, guys. Jimbo Fisher is one of the highest paid coaches in college football right now, behind Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney. But if anyone has official contract information on that, just let me know. But individual performances, I would have to go with Quinn Ewers had the best performance out of the three of those guys. But those are the three best performances of this past weekend. And we also talked about the Ohio State Western Kentucky matchup and what this means for for Ohio State, and why this is big, why this is a big game for Ohio State, and what it represents in terms of validating their decision to go with McCord as the official starting quarterback for the remainder of the season. But I want to talk about this other matchup we have between Kentucky and Missouri, and it's a Big 12 matchup at heart. Yes, it is. This is a Big 12 matchup at heart. For those of you guys who don't know, Missouri used to be in the Big 12. And I will never forget a little quick story. The first year that Missouri transferred over to the SEC, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was the 2012 season. And I'll never forget they played Alabama, and it was a home game for them. And they just got destroyed by Alabama. And I'm trying to think of D. Milner, for those of you who don't know, former defensive back for Alabama, one of the best defensive backs actually in Alabama's history. But I'll never forget, he came down on a cornerback blitz, and he completely just leveled the quarterback. And I thought to myself, and I was young, I was like maybe in middle school or early on in high school, and I watched this game, and I thought to myself, wow, like, that's not a linebacker, that's a cornerback hitting the quarterback like that. And I thought to myself, man, like, that's the first time I really saw pure like size differential between two teams. And obviously at that time, especially, the SEC was known for its dominating defensive linemen and just how big and physical they were compared to other teams in college football. And I just remember watching that game and thought to myself, wow, Alabama is just like completely dominating this Missouri team. And to be fair, Alabama did that to basically everyone. Yes, it did. And when you think about it, was that the best iteration of Nick Saban's Alabama team? If I'm not mistaken, that's the year they only had one loss against Texas A&M. But is that the best iteration of Alabama's team? I think back their first championship when they beat Texas. Wow, they had some great talent on that team. Courtney Upshaw was on that team. Dre Kirkpatrick was on that team. Javier Arenas was on that team. Mark Ingram. Wow, yeah, there was some talent on that team. Julio Jones. Yeah, there was some talent on that team. But also, like you said, the 2012 Alabama team was pretty dominant as well. But not to digress, guys. But So yeah, that was the first time I saw pure size differential was when Missouri moved over to the SEC. But Kansas State, Missouri, guys, let's talk about this right here. So if you're looking at match 2011, 2020, probably better, but 2012 is really good. Yeah, the only thing I would say about that 2011 team is that they struggled offensive. Not struggled, but they weren't as dynamic as the 2020 team and the 2012 teams offensively. Granted, the offense was heavily centered around Trent Richardson at that time, and that was, if I'm not mistaken, AJ McCarron's first year starting for quarterback for them. So he had to go through some growing pains. So that 2011 team was pretty good as well. But 2020, people forget that 2020 team went undefeated. And you want to talk about the talent of that team. Oh, my goodness, on the offensive end, you had Mac Jones and Najee Harris and Brian Robinson and Jalen Waddle and Slade Bolton and Devontae Smith and Cameron Latu. Yeah, there was a lot of talent on that team. Patrick Surtain on the defensive end. In the line, if I'm not mistaken, from that 2020 team, all 5 of the starting linemen got drafted. But yeah, great out 2020, great Alabama team. But Kansas State, Missouri, if you're looking at matchup predictor, Kansas State currently has a 68% chance to win the game against Missouri. This game will be played in Memorial Stadium in Missouri. Kansas State, they're off their 2-0 start. They beat Southeast Missouri State 45-0, and they had another dominating win against Troy, where they won 42-13. And if we look at Missouri Tigers, they're also 2-0. Had a good win against South Dakota State, where they won 35-10. And they had a surprisingly close game against Middle Tennessee State, where they won 23-19. And this is, let's look at, if we're just doing by, games by association or by 6 degrees of separation. And if we look at how Alabama performed against Middle Tennessee State, they won quite convincingly. But let's look at why Missouri struggled so much in this game. They gave up 214 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Let's look at the turnover. They didn't turn over the ball too much. If you look at this game right here and you look at the stat line, Missouri didn't turn the ball over. They threw for 204 yards. They had a touchdown rushing. I think what we're going to have to accept about Missouri is this: they are a team that's going to struggle to score the ball. And, them going up against a Kansas State team that was actually one of the best teams in the country defensively last year. And couple that with the fact that Kansas State is bringing back a couple of guys from the offensive end from last season. This Kansas State team is going to be pretty good. Especially as they get into Big 12 play. Don't be surprised if Kansas State is one of those teams that is making a run at the end of the season for the Big 12 championship. And we know that Kansas State is they played well at the end of last season, and it looks like they're picking up right where they left off at. And like I said, with their performances against Troy and Southeast Missouri State. But one thing I was impressed with Kansas State is their physicality, especially for being a quote-unquote Big 12 team. They have a lot of physicality, especially on the interior. If we look at their game last week against Troy, they had 3 sacks. Khalid Duke had 2 sacks. They had 4 sacks. Khalid Duke had 2 sacks. Nate Matlack had a sack, and Toby Osunami also had a sack as well. And they also had an interception. Will Lee, so they did a great job of creating turnovers. So this is a Kansas State defense that is, like I said, was one of the best in the country last season, and they brought back a lot of returners, a lot of starters from last year, and it looks like they're picking it right where they left off at. And I think that this game between Kansas State and Missouri will, I don't think this game's going to be particularly close, because Missouri has shown that they haven't had the ability to generate much offense and find much of an offensive rhythm so far, 2 games into the season. They're going up against a Kansas State team that it looks like to already be in mid-season peak, at least on the defensive end of the ball. And Missouri's going to struggle to score. They're going to struggle to create long drives, and it's going to bode well for Kansas State. It's going to give Kansas State's offense more opportunities to score, multiple possessions. One thing though I do have a little bit of concern is Will Howard. He has shown, though he didn't have any turnovers 2 weeks ago, he did have an interception last week, like I said, against Troy. And he's shown that he's not scared to put the ball in tight windows, and he's not afraid to test the defense, if I might say. And he's got to be more cautious with his throws and with his reads, because when you get in the Big 12 play, though the Big 12 isn't known for their defense, but when you play against better opponents, better defenses, you have to be more cautious, and your reads have to be more crisp. And that's one thing I would say about Kansas State as they move forward. But their rushing attack, as always, is dominant, even with losing Deuce Vaughn last year. Trayshawn Ward had 58 yards last week against Troy. DJ Giddens had 52 yards as well. Will Howard himself had 33 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. And Phillip Brooks had a touchdown as well on the ground. And so Will Howard, as we see, is dual threat, and he can he's just as effective in the air as he is on the ground. And if I'm Missouri, I'm going to leave a spy. I'm going to leave a spy out there, and I am going to play a little. If you go man coverage, if you're Missouri, then you have to be okay with leaving a spy, but you have to be okay with getting beat on the deep ball. But you have to trust your D line to generate a lot of pressure, and that is where Missouri can make a game out of this. They're able to generate pressure while still leaving a spy out there. But however, will the offense be able to put up enough points against that Kansas State defense? And those are some things that we're gonna have to look for moving forward into this game. But at the time, I do have Kansas State winning this game by a score of 37-14. And this is gonna be a testament of how good Kansas State's defense is with their first SEC matchup of the season before they get into Big 12 play. But guys, that is all we have on the show for today. It has been a wonderful show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the like button as well, so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to us on Patreon so you can stay up to date on all of our exclusive content that we post daily as well. And if you would like to support our network and our company, you can follow the link in the ticker below at streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Networks /tip. All of your support, guys, we're just so grateful for, and none of this is possible without you guys. We're just so grateful to give you guys our analysis and our insight on the world of sports, and thank you so much for listening. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out the GSMC Baseball Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, and the GSMC NFL Podcast as well. Guys, we'll be back again same time tomorrow. Until next time, continue to stay safe, be vigilant, make smart decisions. Peace.